Every year for the past 60 years, we have lost 5,000 teenagers between the ages of 14 and 24 to suicide.
I lost my son Ryan to suicide on October 7, 2003. I've been an advocate for suicide prevention and bullying prevention ever since his death. The mission of Ryan's story is just to visit as many schools as I can throughout the United States to tell his life story and to hopefully inspire young people to either stop bullying or stand up to bullying or ask for help if they are being bullied. The goal is to try to reach young people who perhaps are feeling the way Ryan felt and get them to make a better decision than the one that Ryan made.
I've had depression for 8 years. I was diagnosed in 7th grade, but it was just a buildup of going from 6th grade to 7th grade was a really big adjustment. That's when it was triggered, and it just kind of worsened throughout the years because I isolated myself. I refused to reach out for help for a lot of years because I was afraid of the stigma that's unfortunately so prominent today.
90% of those teenagers have a psychiatric disorder. The leading cause of death for kids between the ages of 14 and 24 is accidents. And the second one is homicide, and the third one is suicide.
52% of all suicides, not just youth suicide, are attributed to firearms. New York State has the SAFE Act, so it's a little harder to access firearms in New York State. So it's actually hanging, and often these events occur in the home or nearby the person's home. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for college students. One of the reasons why the risk increases slightly, we believe, is because first onset of symptoms of mental illness can happen when you enter late adolescence, early adulthood. And then also for high school students as they enter college, if they're already struggling, it can be a difficult transition.
I think the concerns that young people have in regards to suicide is pretty universal. They are very impulsive at a young age, so they're not thinking clearly, and they don't have a view of their future because, they've only lived for a short period of time.
Young teens are under the impression that if they come out about their struggle, people are either going to be afraid of them or not want to hang out with them or think they're too negative, they're a burden.
The symptom of hopelessness, feeling, I don't know how I'm going to get out of here. I don't know how I'm going to deal with another day of school. I don't know how I'm going to deal with the consequences of my crime. I don't know how I'm going to deal with getting out of bed because I'm so depressed. That symptom of hopelessness seems to be the highest risk factor for kids who attempt and complete suicide.
90% of people who die by suicide have a mental health diagnosis. It's even a higher percentage of that. There's comorbidity with drugs and alcohol.
We have to take seriously not only attempts, but when kids give us signs and symptoms that they're struggling with depression, struggling with social isolation, where parents see that there's a change in their behavior or the people around them who love them start worrying about the fact that they're more socially isolated, there's a change in their appetite, a change in their concentration, a change in their ability to really enjoy things that they previously got pleasure out of.
Unfortunately, a lot of parents, and I made this mistake too, is we're afraid to go down this path with them because we don't want to encourage the thought, or we don't want to encourage the thought any further. So an instinctive response to this by a parent is typically, a hug and a pep talk and, try to change the subject. That is not the response that we need to have.
The work we do with parents is around that, like not being afraid to have that really difficult conversation, being able to be that safe person for your child. Also, parents need to know that if their kid is really at high risk, they can't leave them alone.
A lot of people are under the impression that if you ask someone about suicide, that they're going to become suicidal. And that's completely not the case. Be open and direct and try to be as non-judgmental as you can. And saying, I'm wondering if you're having suicidal thoughts or are you thinking of suicide, that is so, so powerful.
Teachers are observing young people throughout the school day and, picking up on little signs. Things like they're perhaps looking a bit more sad than usual, or they're not doing their homework as diligently as they normally do, or they're not participating in class as much as they normally participate.
Teachers need to be really alert. They're gonna see kids day in and day out, and they don't want to convey to a kid that you can't tell me these things. I'm not gonna overreact. I'm here to listen and help you.
There's a big concern with technology and young people nowadays, for obvious reasons, because of all the horrible stories that we keep hearing about kids, doing and saying awful things to each other, especially through social media. But there's also just the general isolating effect of technology too. We think it would be the opposite. You'd have more connections, more friends. But unfortunately, the definition of a friend is, in my opinion, been watered down quite a bit. And kids don't understand that, just because you have friends online that you're communicating with from your bedroom, that's a deep, meaningful relationship. It typically is not.
If we substitute face-to-face contact with screen time and we rely on technology and social media and our mobile devices to have relationships with people, and that becomes sort of a substitute for having real face-to-face encounters with people, I think we sacrifice the real social connection that people need.
I deleted Instagram last year because I realized I was just non-stop comparing myself to people, and I didn't realize it until I became aware of it. And then I realized I don't want to be comparing myself to all these people every single day.
There are some good apps out there to get kids to report suicidal feelings, either for themselves or for friends, because unfortunately that is the preferred way to communicate now with this generation. They'd rather do it behind a screen than do it in person, so you might as well bring the solution to them.
That's why it's so important to have something like a crisis hotline in the moment of crisis, somebody that can help you de-escalate that and slow it down so that you can start really thinking about other things besides just life or death. Or maybe you can start thinking, if I just wait it out and figure out a way to cope, maybe things will get better.
Eventually I did reach out and I got help through my unbelievable therapists, my amazing friends, my family. They definitely have picked me up when I'm down and have pulled me through to get me to where I am today.
I think media can help address this issue in a healthy way if they do it the right way.
Dear Evan Hansen is a remarkable Broadway show. The two main characters, who are teenagers, represent millions of other kids. So for instance, Evan Hansen has a social anxiety disorder. It makes him look so peculiar that he has trouble with his social interactions with his peer group. That character represents at least 5 million kids today in the United States. And the fact that he also has a history of a suicide attempt puts him in, again, that 600,000 every year that make a serious suicide attempt. Connor, the other main character, has a mood disorder, and on top of that, he becomes a substance abuser, because we know that kids with depression and with psychiatric illnesses in general are at higher risk for abusing substances. The parents of Connor and the mother of Evan are lost because there is no guidebook. There is no handbook that says, how do I take care of my kid when they're so unhappy? What's, I think, really uplifting about the show is that it gives parents a chance to recognize they're not alone.
The one particular series that I was familiar with was 13 Reasons Why.
That was my all-time favorite book. In high school, I read it. I can't even tell you how many times. It was very powerful for me because I will never forget the last page. The main character, he realizes that someone else may be struggling and he says her name. And then when I saw the Netflix series, I had mixed feelings about it. I think it was great that they tried to depict it so detailed, but I also think it backfired because I know just me personally, I was extremely triggered, especially in the last scenes watching her harm herself, especially zoomed in. So I think teens, and even like myself, look up to these celebrities, and maybe seeing them acting out that they're getting help or whatever, I think that's helpful and that can inspire them to reach out for help themselves.
I had a problem with that series because they really didn't dive into the mental health aspect of what the young lady was going through. It was more about, cause and effect. People were being mean to her and a whole bunch of things piled up, and she felt suicidal and unfortunately completed suicide at the end. I appreciate trying to get the subject matter out there, but we also need to be very cautious in how we present it to young people and not glamorize suicide in any way.
I think that educating yourself and being aware of the warning signs and ways that you could cope and get through it, and just knowing that you really are never alone.
A parent has to recognize that when their child, who's a teenager or a young adult, tells them they're feeling miserable, not to say, oh, it's nothing, you'll pass through it. You have to really listen and say, I understand. How can I make it better for you?
The one message I want to give to people who are in need is this: you have to step forward. You have to step forward and ask for help. Don't feel embarrassed, don't feel ashamed. You're not the only person feeling this way. But the biggest mistake you could make is not ask for help.
Most people who are thinking about suicide are thinking that, my only two choices are life and death. But the reality is there is a third choice, and that third choice is I can stay safe right now. With that comes the hope and the possibility that if I work on my own safety right now, there is a really good chance that my urge to suicide will abate. We have endless possibilities and endless choices. I always believe in the possibility that things will get better and that hope is possible.